In this video, we will look at what you need to consider when you are citing yourself. And for this video, I will assume that you are writing your doctoral thesis and have already published parts of your result in one paper or several papers through a publisher. The first important question is, do you have to cite yourself? And with scientific literature, we always assume that the findings come from the author and that you show new findings, so that they are published for the first time and that they are correct and reliable. So anything that has been published before must be cited. It doesn't matter if it's from someone else or yourself. The point is not only to distinguish what is your output and what is someone else's, but also what is already known, which means already published. And that's why we need to cite ourselves as well. Nevertheless, the contents should only be repeated if it is necessary for comprehension or the context is necessary. Your work should not become a kind of billboard in which you cite again everything that you have already published just to sell it again. So now we know you have to cite yourself. And the next question is that what I want to do with my published results? Is it still a citation? And to answer that question, we need to take a quick look at what a citation is. At this point, I would like to ask you to think about it and maybe write it down. What makes a citation a citation? Where are the limits of a citation? And at what point is something no longer a citation? I usually get very few and very uncertain answers when I ask this question in my courses, and it is also because we have different citation terms. On the one hand, we have direct citation, also called quotes, and we have indirect citation, also called paraphrases. And we'll look at both a bit closer right now. Quotations are defined in copyright law, namely in the citation right. And this citation right says that if you want to quote something, you have to fulfill certain conditions. These conditions can be easily remembered with the acronym PMAC. It says that you need a citation purpose, and this citation purpose you have to explain. That means you have to deal with the content we are quoting. You can't just leave the quote there without commenting on it. Furthermore, you should only use what is necessary in terms of content. That means that you only use the minimum. And what you use there, you use unchanged. Furthermore, you need a reference list, so you have to mark in the text what you have taken over, and then you make a complete reference in the reference list, so that your reader can find the source again. And if you meet these 5 requirements, then you may quote any published work, and that is guaranteed to you by law. It is in many cases, however, that what you want to cite from yourself, you don't want to explain the content again, but you actually want to present your results a second time. So if you do not quote, you are left to paraphrase. If you paraphrase, you take over content and dress it in a new way. You give it a new form. And you are allowed to do that in principle as much as you want. Because the copyright protects only the form that an idea has taken, not the content itself. So, as long as you find a new form of presentation, you may paraphrase. But even seen in a purely legal way, you do not have to apply this PMAC scheme for indirect citations. It makes sense to do so here. Because, of course, even if you quote indirectly, your quote should have a purpose, and it should be clear to your reader what the purpose is. And you should only use what is necessary in terms of content. After all, the point is not to use citations to fill pages. And also here, the statement should remain unchanged, so the meaning shouldn't be changed. And you have to have a bibliography as well, so in principle, this PMAX scheme is still useful for paraphrases. So we have these two options to cite yourself. You can quote or you can paraphrase. And if you want to quote yourself, the crucial question is, do you deal with the quote again in terms of content? And if not, it's not longer a quote. For indirect quotes, the crucial question is, have you really given this content a new form? And there too, if you answer this question with no, it's no longer a paraphrase. Now, if you don't quote or paraphrase, what is it that you're doing? And the answer is, most likely, it's a second publication. If you publish something as a second publication, you may only do so with the copyright holder's permission. The copyright always lies with you as an author or authors, and that means if someone does something with your work, they have to name you as the author. And the right of use also lies with you in the beginning, and that right says who is allowed to do what with your work. If you now publish with a publisher, you give the rights of use to the publisher. And here's the question, how many rights have you given to the publisher? Have you granted the publisher a simple right of use, which, for example, allows the publisher to publish your work once in print and online? If so, you still retain rights of use, so that you may decide what happens with your work after this one-time publication of the publisher. However, if you grant a publisher an exclusive right of use, you give all rights of use to the publisher. This means that even if you want to use your work again, you must obtain permission from the publisher. In other words, the first thing you must clarify is who owns the rights of use. Have you handed them over entirely to the publisher? If so, then get permission from the publisher. Or, if you have only given a simple right of use, then the rights of use remain with you as an author. Or authors, if you have co-authors. And if you have published with several, then do exactly the same. Get the agreement of your co-authors to publish this work again. Now, if you get permission for a second publication, there are 3 things you have to keep in mind. The first is the intended use. When you get a permission, it must say exactly what you want to use it for. It can't be a general permission for everything. So it cannot say you can use this work for anything you want in the future, but it is always for a specific purpose. So think beforehand, what do you want to use this for? And then get permission for that. If you want to use this work again sometime later for a different purpose, you get a new permission. It must also clarify, especially if you publish the article completely for a second time, which version you are allowed to use. There are publishers who allow you to use the pre-printed version, that is the version before the article has gone through the peer review process. But there are also publishers who allow the publication of the accepted version, so the version after the article has gone through the review process and after you've made the changes. And there are publishers who explicitly say they want you to use the publisher's layout so that you really use the final version as it is appearing in a journal. So you have to check beforehand which version are you allowed to use. And then you must always refer to it, so you always need the reference to the original publication. What does this reference look like? A general reference in the preface or at the beginning of a chapter, like significant parts of this work have already been published in journal is insufficient. Why is this not sufficient? Because good scientific practice requires you to separate between already published findings and new ones. And that you label your second publication or even the individual parts that you publish again from the first publication, just like any other citation. So you have a source citation in the text, and you mark in the text where it starts and where it ends with quotation marks, or over formulation, you make a short reference and then have a complete source citation in the reference list. So from the technique, you refer to your own work, no matter if it is a citation or a second publication. It is always the same. Now often comes the objection, if I have now again and again short sections from my first publication, and in between use again and again new results or thoughts, then it looks really stupid if I refer every few sentences to the same own article. And that, is the case. So what you can do sometimes is that you try to bundle, that you first present the results that have already been published in the paper and then add anything new. So that's possible. Sometimes it makes sense too in terms of content. And if you now say it doesn't make sense to bundle this for my case, then you actually have to start from sentence level or even partial sentence level, depending on how detailed you take content from your first publication. So you have to mark it just as precisely as with any other citation. So let's summarize. You have 3 ways to use your own work. You can quote, you can paraphrase, and you can publish for a second time. With the quotations, you always have to make sure that you have the explanation. With the paraphrase, you always have to ensure that you have a new form of your content. And for the second publication, you have to make sure that you have the permission. And once you have clarified these frameworks that allow you to use your work again, the reference to the original work is always the same. And you cite exactly the same way as any other citation.